I was wrong about the church, and I had taught it for years. I grew up as a dispensationalist, essentially a Baptist. I thought about the pre-trib rapture, that's what I heard. Thought it was gospel. And the dispensational framework essentially says that there were 7 dispensations throughout world history, and God has been acting slightly different in each dispensation. The 2 most important are the dispensation of law that started with Moses at Mount Sinai and then went all the way to the cross. And then when Jesus rose, it began the age of grace. And that age of grace is continuing until the church gets raptured out of here, and then you have the tribulation, etc. That was the world that I grew up in. I thought it was absolutely true. I couldn't articulate that when I was a kid, but as I continued to study, and then when I became a pastor at Calvary Chapel, that is exactly what I was teaching at the Calvary Chapel School of Ministry in Southern California. I believed it. I taught it. I lived it. I breathed it. I thought it was absolutely 100% correct. And when I would hear about someone talk about replacement theology, my eyes would roll. I thought, oh my goodness, these people are crazy. And it makes no sense. There's no way on God's green earth that God replaced the Jews with the church or replaced Israel with the church. And so I had no understanding for how somebody could actually believe in replacement theology. But I was giving a paper called Why God Did Not Elect Calvinists. I decided to write it because I was teaching theology at the school, and I really didn't like the 2 options that I had. Essentially, Calvinism or Arminianism. In other words, God elected all believers to be saved through no choice of their own. He just elected people. Or Arminianism says no, people have a choice, etc. And I thought, wait, these are both dealing with a question of election just from 2 different sides, but I think there's a third option. And so in my paper, I was arguing that election has nothing to do with your salvation. Election has to do with God having elected Israel as his people. And I think I showed very effectively in that paper that God had chosen Israel. But here's the part that I didn't get. And it was when I was taking questions after presenting this paper that someone completely tripped me up. They said, Doug, you keep talking about Israel as if it's the Jews and the Jews only. And I thought that's how I've always heard it. But after this question, I went back, I started digging, and lo and behold, I start finding the house of Israel and the house of Judah. I was like, wait a second, how did I not ever hear about this? And so I kept digging and digging. And then I came to the writings of Paul. Now, I was reading in the New English Translation because it was new at the time, and someone that I know had worked on it. So I'm going through Ephesians chapter 1, and I come to verse 11. It says, in Christ, we too have been claimed as God's own possession. I thought, well, that's just wrong. Clearly, this translation is not very good. Because in the King James, New King James, and other similar translations, it says something very different. It says, in whom also we have obtained an inheritance. I looked at the Greek. The New English Translation is correct. It's not that we, believers, are getting something. Rather, we're the treasure that's being inherited. This is the same exact language that God was using when he was talking about Israel. He said that you are my special people. You are a treasure to me. You are my inheritance. Paul is talking about how Israel is God's inheritance. In this book, the book of Ephesians, he's talking about we and you. And then I went over to chapter 2. This is one of the central passages of our faith. For by grace you've been saved through faith, that not of yourselves is the gift of God. And he goes on to say, remember that you, in times past, you Gentiles, at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the Commonwealth of Israel. And I froze. I said, so they were Gentiles. Look, I am not Jewish. I don't pretend to be Jewish. I'm a Gentile. A Gentile is coming from the Latin word gens. It means peoples, nations. Okay, that's me. And he says that you were a Gentile. I said, wait, what do you mean I was a Gentile? I'm not Jewish. But he says I was a Gentile. And then he says that I was an alien from the Commonwealth of Israel and stranger from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God of the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you, or speaking to me, right, who were sometimes far off, have been brought near by the blood of Christ. And then I get to verse 19, and what does he say? Therefore you, Doug, are no longer a stranger or a foreigner, but a fellow citizen with the saints. The word saint, if we go back to the Hebrew, it's the word kedushim. It's talking about the people that God had chosen for himself so they would be set apart. When someone comes to faith, they say, well, where should I start reading in the Bible? And I used to say this, you should start reading the book of John, of course, because it's all about Jesus. But it's not really the best practice. If you're going to read any book, where do you normally start reading any book? Just a wild hint, and you begin in the beginning, right? That's where you start. Start in the front of the book so that you can now have the time, the place, you can understand the rationales, the motivations, and you can have the backstory. So that by the time you get to the end of the book, you're like, oh, I know these characters, I know their motives, I know what they're doing, and it's all starting to make sense. But when we start in the New Testament, we're now coming into a world that we don't understand, expressions we don't understand, people we don't understand. I thought there were only two options. It was either dispensationalism or replacement theology. But as I continued to study, I began to see a bigger perspective. That God and Israel enter into a marriage covenant at Mount Sinai. A marriage covenant. How interesting, isn't it? You see, when people think about the old covenant, they think about laws. They think that God was some HR manager. He had his checklist. You got to do everything right. You got to do it by the book. And if you don't, then you're in big trouble. You're going to get fired. And then we come to the New Testament, and God's much more like a hippie. He's just laid back, hey, chill. But God hasn't changed. And the story of the Bible is about God and Israel. From Genesis to Revelation, right? We have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we have his 12 sons, and then that's the story of the entire Bible all the way to the end. We forget about the covenant that they entered into at Mount Sinai was a loving marriage relationship covenant. And what happened is God kept his side, but Israel did not. In 932 BC, the United Kingdom of Israel split in two. They became the southern kingdom of the house of Judah and the northern kingdom of the house of Israel, also known as Ephraim. The house of Israel, from the time of 932 BC till about 722 BC, they kept going from bad to worse. God sent prophet after prophet, encouraging them to come back, pleading with them, warning them, until finally God said, okay, that's it. Here is your certificate of divorce. Goodbye. And as they were leaving, packing their bags, God said, but one day I'm going to betroth you to me in righteousness. Hosea chapter 2. I'm going to betroth you to me in righteousness forever. That's what God said. So I thought, wait, betrothal, that's the whole idea of marriage, right? And that's this idea that we see in the New Testament that he is preparing the church for a pure and spotless bride for her husband. In the book of Revelation, we see that the New Jerusalem, which includes the people, right? It's prepared as a bride for her bridegroom. We see this all over the place. This idea of marriage and then betrothal. And in the middle, what we've forgotten was the divorce. The divorce is incredibly important because once you understand that, you understand how there was a promise to put it back together. In Ezekiel 37, God says he's going to take these two sticks, the one for the house of Judah and the other one for the house of Israel, and he's going to put them together, and they're going to be one stick in his hand. Never again will they be two nations. I've been looking at the comments people have been sending me, and they're saying, Doug, I don't understand what you're talking about. Hey, I get it. I didn't get it either, and I wrestled with this. I was wondering, am I crazy? I did not want to be responsible for leading people astray. I didn't want to lead myself astray. I didn't want to fall into some crazy delusion. So I kept digging. And as you look at this passage here in Ephesians chapter 2, Paul is saying, essentially in his own words, he is talking about the restoration of the two sticks in Ezekiel 37. Now, if this is the first time you're hearing about the two sticks, you're not alone. It had never been presented to me in all my years of theological study. I mean, I knew the chapter was there, but I didn't think it had any bearing for me as a believer. I didn't think it had any bearing for the church. I just thought it was part of that front of the book Jewish stuff. But once I began to see all of this in a different light, I realized that I'd been quite wrong about the church. I had been quite wrong about how I was reading Paul. For example, when we come to Romans chapter 11, and he talks about the fullness of the Gentiles, he's quoting from Genesis 48, where Jacob crossed his hands and he put his right hand on the head of Ephraim, which becomes the nickname for the house of Israel. This is where we look at Jeremiah 31:31. Behold, the days are coming when I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. You see, it all goes back to those things. And so when we are looking at the writings of Paul, largely he is addressing how the two, house of Israel, house of Judah, how they're going to come back together and become one again. So I see things very differently. I'm no longer a dispensationalist. I'm definitely not a replacement theologian. I've taken a middle option. I call it Commonwealth Theology. I'd encourage you to pick up God's Divorce. I think it's going to really help put things in perspective in a way that you've not seen before. And if you want to go deeper, join us every Shabbat, every Sabbath at the Way Congregation in Denver, Colorado.